As rightly said, our keynote speaker today is a man in the tech space, in the banking space. He's, I wouldn't want to use the word a wizard. He's a futurist, but when it comes to talking about the future, predicting the future, he is a man that has repeatedly maneuvered somehow the intricacies of the banking sector, the technology, and he's a renowned futurist. He's a speaker, best-selling author. Banking 4.0, if you know the book, has been the top 5. I think it's even #1 currently on Amazon. And this is a book he wrote years ago. I'm sure he's working on 5.0 somewhere very soon. It's really an honor to have him here with us. Not just because it's the tech conference, not just because it's Zenith, but because of the wealth of experience he's bringing here. And like most of the speakers will tell you, it's about the future. And the future is uncomfortable, it's uncertain. Sometimes you need guidance, you need to know which path to go. You're hearing cryptocurrency, you're hearing Bitcoin, you're hearing technology. How do you navigate this space as an individual and as a business? Our speaker is the President Xi Jinping cited his book that's augmented on the topic of artificial intelligence, and he was voted top foreign author for 2019 in Russia. He's spoken in over 50 countries at TED conferences, giving opening keynotes for Wired, Singularity University, Web Summit, The Economist, IBM's World of Boston, to mention a few. But I think we need to give him a warm Nigerian welcome, as we call him our friend in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, please do make welcome the one, the legendary Brett King, the founder of Moving and author of Bank 4.0. I'm sure we can show him some Nigerian love. Let me hear you make some noise. I didn't say scare him or... Please do make welcome Brett King. Okay, he's getting ready now. For those of you who do not know, thank God Google is your friend. And you can find out more about him. But if you're interested in the future, you might say, oh, I'm not into banking, I'm not into tech. Look, whatever you do, you are going to be part of it directly or indirectly. So prepare to be wowed with our keynote speaker. Still ahead, we have panel sessions and we have presentations as well. You get to meet some of our panelists. But for those of you joining us online, it's great to have you here with us. You haven't missed much. There's still a lot in store. And of course, there's still tomorrow. The hashtag is ZB Tech Fair 2022. That's hashtag ZB Tech Fair 2022. Those of you online, give us a wave. Let us know what you had for breakfast. If there are any questions, shoot us up and we'll be in touch soon. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, properly, a warm Nigerian welcome to our keynote speaker, Mr. Brett King.
Thank you, no problem. Hello. Yeah, let's see. Maybe can you guys hear me? Ah, yes, very good. Now, first off, I want to start by just getting a selfie with everybody. That seems appropriate, right? We're at a tech fair. All right, wave. Excellent. How about, can you give me a 4 for Bank 4.0, right? Perfect. Very good. Thank you very much. Do you know what the definition of a futurist is? It means never being wrong today. You have to think about it a little bit. But I want to take you on a journey into the future. I want to talk about what is going to be happening over the next 20 or 30 years and exploring some of the potential paths. When we talk about predicting the future, it's not really like fortune telling. It's forecasting. We look at trends, we look at behaviors, and we look at a zone of possibilities. So when I present these ideas to you this morning, these are general concepts that we know from the trends that are likely to happen and are going to impact the planet. I want to start with big world view. So what's going to happen over the next 30 years on the planet, and then we're going to drill down into banking, particularly looking at the impact of Zenith Bank and what is happening on the continent. Let's start with... I don't think this is working. Could I have the next slide, please? Or another clicker? Thank you. So let's start with the macro view of the economy and what's going to happen in the economy. There is a lot of uncertainty that the pandemic created as a result of the COVID virus, the impact in terms of the economy. We're now seeing a global recession. But in addition to this, we have, of course, the emergence of climate change, which is a real concern for people. We have also the impact of artificial intelligence. Our friends like Zeba, right, is it? Zeba the robot, who are going to be impacting the way we think about employment and so forth on the planet. And then the effects of the pandemic and also things like artificial intelligence are creating problems in the area of things like inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor. In the United States, this inequality has been really accentuated significantly due to the pandemic. And so this is something that we're concerned about. All of this creates uncertainty. People are unsure about what's going to happen in the future. And as a result, in the first 20 years of the 21st century, we saw a lot of protests. These were people protesting the governments and other things around the world. When Donald Trump was elected, there was many protests around the world. We've seen protests for women's rights. We've seen protests against the vaccination and things like this. But in the future, the world of economies are going to change dramatically because of the injection of artificial intelligence and technology. If you're in the field of technology, your future is really quite certain and positive in the future. I'm sorry, the slides seem to be magically advancing on their own. Maybe they're trying to get me to the future, I don't know. And so when we talk about artificial intelligence, we really talk about 3 stages of development of artificial intelligence. Right now, we have what we call machine learning and deep learning, but the next phase of AI is what we call artificial general intelligence. This is when we can have these computers or artificial intelligent machines that can mimic human intelligence. They may not be the same as the type of intelligence we have, but they will be able to convince us that they are conscious. We will be able to have a conversation with them. And an artificial general intelligence, you'll be able to teach to do anything you can teach a human to do. Now, this sounds like science fiction, but whenever we talk about artificial intelligence, this has always been the goal, to have an AI that could be our companion from an intelligence perspective. The downside to this is if we can teach machines anything a human can do, then they could replace us when it comes to employment. This is why you should always be working with robots and technology in the future, because this is going to be at the core of every industry. And when we look at the development of these technologies, the next stage of AI is what we call hyper-intelligent artificial intelligence. These are machines that are smarter than humans. This presents us with some real philosophical decisions to make or to grapple with. We've never had to live with other intelligence on the planet that matches us in terms of our creativity or thinking power. But AI is potentially going to represent that shift. So this is a big change for us in terms of humanity. Now, part of this is that robots are going to be on the planet, right? Robots are going to be everywhere. In fact, we think by 2035, that's about 13 years from now, that there will be more robots on the planet than humans. Right? That's a pretty big deal, right? I would just say to you, be kind to robots. You never know what's going to happen in the future, right? With AI. But this does change the way we think about employment patterns and things like that in respect to what we're going to be doing for work. But the smartest economies, or the biggest economies in the world in the 2030s, will be smart economies. China is a great example of this, with their investment in central bank digital currencies, the Belt and Road Initiative, and things like this. China is advancing very rapidly in the use of artificial intelligence. And underpinning the development of these smart economies is what we call smart contracts. So smart contracts are essentially using artificial intelligence to create automation at a society level. And this requires us to have programmable money, like CBDCs or like crypto, tokens, utilities, and so forth. This is the requirement for us to be able to have a future economy based on artificial intelligence. We're not going to be able to use US dollars to do this. So when we talk about robots and artificial intelligence, where does the term robot come from? Actually comes from this 1921 play, which was called Rossum's Universal Robots. You can see these human actors. They didn't have iPhones back then, so I apologize for the quality of the photo, but this was 1921. The Czech word roboti means a servant. So we are talking about an electronic or mechanical servant. That's what we call a robot today. And so, yes, we are designing AI to be this service layer supporting our economy, but when there are more robots than humans on the planet, this is going to really effectively change the way we think about society more broadly, particularly in respect to the way we work in society. Amazon and Walmart and organizations like them are going to be sending these robot drones to deliver packages all around the world. And so, the drivers driving around Lagos delivering takeout and things like this, maybe they're going to be replaced by drones in the future. This is certainly going to happen, in modern economies. To power this smart economies of the future, we're going to have to invest in a lot of energy systems, but not burning coal or natural gas. Today, the cheapest form of electricity generation in the world is renewables, solar and wind. In fact, we're getting to the point today, in the United States, as an example, it is today cheaper to deploy a brand new solar farm than it is just to keep an existing coal plant running. And within a few years, it'll be cheaper to put solar panels on your roof to generate electricity than just transmitting the energy across the wires of the electrical networks or the retail electricity networks that we have today. So this is a natural investment. The advantage that the African continent has with a lot of these new technologies is, we don't have a lot of legacy infrastructure that's been developed like we do in the West. That all in the United States, they're always arguing about what happens to all the coal jobs if we deploy solar energy. But as the African continent becomes more affluent and the economic activity improves here, we are installing this greenfield technology to improve the economy. So if we could go back, please, a couple of slides to the healthcare. Thank you. So healthcare is another area where artificial intelligence is going to dramatically impact society. Right now, today, in an average economy, we spend about 7 or 8% of GDP on healthcare. The United States spends 16% of their GDP on healthcare. But the US is extremely inefficient with healthcare. They pay twice what the rest of the OECD nations and the G20 pay for access to healthcare, and often the outcomes are worse off. So we like to think like the US is the best economy in the world, but in areas like the use of smart contracts, central bank digital currencies, the deployment of artificial intelligence, and the advancement of healthcare, the US is slipping a long way behind. The US is no longer the world leader in these areas. But think about this. We have gene therapy. Gene therapy has come from the use of computers where we've been able to look at the technology of gene sequencing and now take your genome or your DNA and read it. Now, back in the 1980s, when the Human Genome Project happened, it cost $1 billion, or actually $10 billion, to sequence the first human genome. Today, we can do that same job in 24 hours for a few $100s. Over the next 15 to 20 years, because of computing technology, we'll not only be able to read your DNA, but we'll be able to edit it like a software program, like a bug in the software program. So if you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or heart disease or breast cancer or these genetic disorders, we'll just flip some protein switches in your DNA and eliminate these hereditary diseases. Imagine the impact that's going to have on healthcare. In the West, 40% of diagnosis for healthcare is wrong. So that's why you always ask a doctor for a second opinion, right? Because you've got only a 1 in 2 chance, roughly. But AI is now outperforming human doctors in respect to diagnostics. And it's not because AIs are smarter, it's because machine learning is able to collect all of the expertise of the best doctors in the world and apply this using machine learning. So if you take something like MRI or CAT scans, if you use a machine learning algorithm, by the time you absorb like 3,000 examples of a certain type of diagnosis, the machine can hit the same sort of results as a doctor. But if you increase that to 30,000 or 300,000 or 3 million cases, guess what happens? Those AI algorithms get more and more accurate than human doctors at parsing that information. And then we'll have things like 3D printing used in 3D bioprinting. So if you need a transplant, you won't have to wait for a transplant list. We'll just reprint you a new kidney or a new liver or maybe a new heart in the future using your own cells to make this new artificial organ. And then we may be living longer as well with longevity treatments. This is very exciting, but it requires the broad implementation of technology in our societies. So moving forward, when we look at the next element of this in terms of, could I have the next slide, please? When we look at the next element of this, the real question is, as economies change and start to get restructured around these technologies, what happens to the role of employment? Well, in today's economy, the way we distribute wealth is we give people jobs. Right? This is how we think about it. The market creates activity. Those companies generate profits. As the market improves, then we have more people that we can employ, and this is how we get wealth distribution. But if we are using more and more of AI, then things change. You might have seen a graph on economics, supply and demand economics, from The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith. This graph, if I could have the next slide, please. This graph shows us, we'll talk about the food scarcity in a second. This graph shows us how supply and demand curves work. But it's really limited to this concept of human labor and human capital at the core of economic activity. AI sort of changes the rules. But climate change is going to turn all of that on its head. It's going to change the way we think about employment. It starts with food scarcity. As the temperatures rise, we get a problem in terms of the way we think about food distribution and so forth. Just in the last 50 years, we've lost 40% of our farmland globally because of soil erosion, increasing temperature, pollution, and things like this. As the sea level rise continues, this problem's going to get worse. So we have to use technology to improve our food production. Otherwise, we are going to have problems with access to food. Even during the pandemic, we've seen supply chains challenged in terms of food delivery. And also, sea level rise is going to be a big issue for us. So, we are expecting about a foot of sea level rise by 2050, and it depends on where that is. It could be higher than that. But there are 500 capital cities around the world that are on coastlines. Half of the human population lives within about 100 kilometers of the coastline. And what we know is that sea level rise is going to have a devastating impact on these living areas. Bangladesh, the Maldives, cities like this are going to be really inundated by sea level rise and affected by this dramatically. The estimates are somewhere between 300 million and 1.6 billion people will be displaced by food scarcity and sea level rise. Now, if you look at those estimates, have you been watching what happened in Pakistan this year with the floods? So just this year alone, we've had 65 million people displaced by climate change. This is not something that's going to happen in the distant future, like Donald Trump said, right? He said it's a Chinese fraud, climate change. It's happening right now. We can see it with bushfires and wildfires. We can see it with flooding in places like Pakistan. Unfortunately, it's going to get worse. We have to adapt to this as a human species. This is really key. So how are we going to adapt? Well, we have the technology. So, for example, in respect to food production, we can build self-sufficiency. We can improve our ability to produce food locally. Vertical farming technologies, such as this, allow us to put farming technologies in our cities and produce food with 10% of the water use that we normally use for typical agricultural methods. And we'll have lab-grown proteins. So you'll get your meat not from a cow, but from a factory that produces meat, lab-grown proteins. I don't know, maybe we'll call it an e-cow or something. I don't know, right? But it could work. Or maybe synth food or something. And homelessness is another thing that technology will allow us to solve as a problem. For just $3,000 or $4,000 today, we can print a 3D printed home that could be used for a family of 4. And this could solve the world's problem of homelessness, particularly when we think about all the eco-refugees and so forth. The US, again, has a terrible record with homelessness. Prior to the pandemic, the US had about 600,000 homeless. Today, it's 3.2 million. That's because of the pandemic. 30 million Americans are facing eviction right now because of inflation increasing rent prices. You know, this is the thing, is we talk about the US like it's the best economy in the world. But if your economy can't feed your people, house your people, give them health care, and give them access to education, then is it a functional economy? And this is really the philosophical shift that climate change and AI will force upon us. That the economy is not just about creating profits for companies. That the economy has to service the needs of citizens first and foremost. And this is the challenge. Now, some of the technologies we're using for this are things like the blockchain. So we can now put our real estate on the blockchain. But don't forget, the metaverse is coming along, and we're going to have virtual real estate as well. Right? So, in fact, some people think the reason Mark Zuckerberg and Meta are creating the metaverse is because of unemployment that artificial intelligence is going to bring. Because when people are stuck at home, living on universal basic income, then maybe they'll be sitting in the metaverse to entertain themselves, distracting themselves from the fact that the wealthy own all the assets and all the wealth, and they're stuck on a universal basic income. This is a functional issue we have to resolve in terms of this. Next slide, please. This is an example of what's going to happen in the Maldives because of sea level rise. 80% of the Maldives and Bangladesh infrastructure by 2050 are gone because of sea level rise. Miami-Dade in the United States is the single most affected residential area of any city on the planet. And this is going to be over $1 trillion of economic impact from sea level rise. What is the US's response to this? Well, in Florida, they say you can't talk about climate change. Well, because they're not adapting to it. They're just saying, look, if people can afford, they can move. If you can't afford it, I'm sorry, you're just going to be stuck with flooding. This is not a plan. We need a plan in terms of the future. And so for the second half of this century, a lot of you are going to be working in climate mitigation, building seawall defenses, building sustainable energy systems, making infrastructure climate resilient. This is really part of our adaptability in respect to this. So this is going to be a big employer in the future. Next slide, please, yes. So this means that the capital markets of the 2050s, and even probably starting next decade, is companies will have to be seen as doing good for their communities, not just producing profits. They'll have to be carbon neutral. They have to be sustainable, and they'll have to have a mission that fits with the needs of citizens. This is the philosophical shift. Now, what gets really interesting is when we talk about the future, in terms of resources, we have some amazing opportunities like asteroid mining. Now, this week, you may have seen Artemis, which is the mission that NASA is sending to the moon. We're going to put astronauts back on the moon over the next decade or so. And then maybe we're going to send astronauts to Mars with Elon Musk's Starlink program. Then we're just a generation or two away in terms of technology to be able to mine asteroids. This is one asteroid in the asteroid belt. It's called Psyche-16. Its value is $10 quintillion in today's terms because of the precious metals, gold, silver, the rare earth metals that are contained in this asteroid. That's 100,000 times current GDP from one asteroid. So in the 2040s or 2050s, when we start to mine asteroids, imagine what that does to capital markets. It suddenly collapses. So what's going to happen with Zenith Bank and banking in the 2040s and 2050s with these technologies? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. When we infuse technology, we're at the tech fair, remember? When we infuse technology into financial services, it changes the dynamic. Banks are not banks anymore. Banks are technology companies that do banking. And this is the big shift. Banks that don't adapt to this technology world are going to have significant problems. So the ecosystem that we're looking at in 2025 contains a number of new players. We have the surviving banks that have adapted to technology. We have the fintechs who are specialists in this arena. We have some very successful fintechs on the African continent, of course, as well as the mobile money schemes and so forth. They are coexisting with the banking system now. And then we have the tech giants, right? We have the operating systems, that are on our phones. We're going to have smart glasses as the next generation of technologies that we're going to be using. It'll take a little bit longer here in Africa, but we expect in January of 2023 for Apple to launch their iReality smart glasses. And then we have data providers that will help us enable these experiences, open banking platforms and so forth. This is what the ecosystem of financial services looks like in 2025, just a couple of years away. It's not just banks anymore that are doing banking. It's lots of organizations. But as we infuse technology into our world, we reduce the friction of banking. So we make banking accessible when and where you need it through the technology layer. How many of you have visited a bank branch in the last couple of years? Put up your hand if you visited a bank branch. See, there's not many hands. We don't do our banking in bank branches anymore. Yes, some people go into a branch to open an account and things like this. And yes, we still need that infrastructure. But for every one visit you make to a bank branch today, you're likely to do 350 or more digital interactions. So banking is about the technology today. It's not about those old artifacts, signing an application form, getting a plastic card, or doing those things that we used to think of banking. Banking has already changed, but it's advancing at a fast rate because of these technologies. Now, when smartphones came along, the first thing we did is we said, you know what, we could use this instead of a debit card or credit card. We could turn a phone into a payment device. So in the West, what did we do? Well, we iterated on the existing technology. We stuck a plastic card inside the phone. This was to make sure MasterCard and Visa didn't get upset because we weren't disrupting their business, right? These were the rules. In fact, Apple wanted to deploy their mobile wallet without plastic cards, and both Visa and MasterCard refused to work with Apple until they agreed to issue a card. And now they have this titanium card that Apple uses. But no one really uses the Apple card. They still use Apple Pay. They use their phone. But in China, something very different happened. In China, they started with QR codes. Now, these QR codes were just pictures, as you know, and all you needed was a QR code on your phone as a merchant to accept a payment from a customer. Very simple. This enabled network effects, so the mobile payment schemes in China grew extremely rapidly. Now, today, what is it like? Well, last year in China did almost $77 trillion, $76.8 trillion of mobile payments. Why is that significant? That's more than all of the debit card and credit card payments in the entire world. In fact, next slide, please. It's twice what it is in the rest of the world. But now we're using facial recognition in China. And this was predicted in science fiction. Do you remember seeing this movie? The Minority Report with Tom Cruise. Could we play the video clip, please? This was a video clip of this movie, Minority Report, where iris recognition was used by this character, Tom Cruise, to transact. When he's going on the trains, when he's going into stores. His American Express was his eyeball, right? And this is the technology we now see possible because of artificial intelligence, that we can now do facial recognition. These computers can recognize a face better than humans today. That's why when you come to countries like the UK or throughout the EU, they have these machines that take a photograph and compare your picture with your passport. Because these AI algorithms are already more accurate than some guy sitting behind a glass window saying, "Can you take off your glasses, please, sir?" Right? AI is better at this job already. But then the question is, with these mobile wallets exploding around the world, becoming the world's #1 bank account today, what happens next? Mobile wallets have to start using technology around smart money. So let's play the next video. This is a clip from a game called Cyberpunk 2077. I don't know whether you've played this game, but in this game, they have this concept of euro dollars. It's the euro and the dollar has merged to become a single global currency they call eddies. Right? This has been a concept in science fiction we've talked about, maybe having a global digital currency. In fact, if you read the Bitcoin white paper from Satoshi in 2008, this was one of the proposals made by Satoshi, that Bitcoin could become a global digital currency. But actually, we now think that it's likely we're going to have regional currencies for trade, probably CBDCs, and then we're going to have specialized currencies like crypto and tokens and things like that for specialized utility. We're not going to have a global currency maybe for another 100 years, if ever, right? But crypto is not dead. Don't believe what you read on Financial Times or Fox News. It's not, because we need programmable money for smart economies, right? And it's not going to be just CBDCs, because CBDCs don't have all the flexibility and functionality that we might need for these different applications. Next slide, please. And so when we look at these changes and technologies, in terms of how it's affecting us, one of the things we do know is as we start using mobile wallets more and as we start integrating smart contracts, then what's going to happen is cash is going to start to decline. Yes. These mobile wallets, as we see, China, $77 trillion of mobile payments last year. The rest of the world's card payments, $38 trillion. So today already, mobile wallets are the #1 bank account of the world. You know it here in Africa. We've got MTN and Orange here. We've got M-Pesa. We've got Paytm in India. We've got Gcash and Paymaya in the Philippines, Kakao in South Korea, PayPal and Venmo in the United States. The world's bank account today is already a mobile wallet. And so this changes the way we think about delivering banking and banking technologies and service. It's not the delivery of a product you go and pick up at a branch anymore. You now are trying to get people to use that mobile wallet infrastructure and access credit and savings in real time. This is the big change. Next slide, please. The largest fintech in the world is this company, Ant Group. It was founded by the founder of Alibaba, used to be a school teacher in China, Jack Ma. Now, unfortunately, Ma has run into some trouble in recent times in China because of his comments on education and the future of education in China. But quite frankly, he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs that not only China has seen, but the world has seen. Ant Group makes phenomenal profits. They are the fourth or fifth largest financial institution in the world today if you measure them by market capitalization. Right up there with the top banks. Sorry about that, Chairman. And it's a little bigger than Zenith, but I'm sure we'll be able to fix it. I'll work on it with you later, no problem, right? So, and the largest challenger bank in the world is also out of China, called WeBank, out of Shenzhen. Thank you. They have 250 million customers over just the space of 7 or 8 years. Imagine trying to build a bank with 250 million customers where you have to get them to come into a branch and sign a piece of paper. Right? You can't do it, right? This is why when we talk about the future of banking, we're talking about technology. Because if you want to scale a bank, if you want to grow a bank fast in the 21st century, you have to do it through digital. Another example of this is Nubank in the Latin American economies. Next slide, please. And Nubank, when it IPO'd, was valued at $53 billion. This was in December last year. That made them the largest bank in Latin America. Now, their valuation has declined somewhat since then, but compared with Itaú, a 100-year-old bank that was the first bank, the largest bank in Latin America, they have the same number of customers, but they're just 8 years old. Their cost of acquisition is about $5 per customer, whereas Itaú is paying $70 or $80 per customer to acquire them digitally today, and even more to acquire them in a bank branch. This is the power that these specialist fintechs have created in terms of putting pressure on the system. We also have Revolut in the EU market. In the middle of last year, they took $800 billion of investment. Now, Revolut is the largest challenger bank in the EU market. They're break even right now. They have now 25 million customers. I haven't updated this slide, which was just announced. But then you have N26 in Germany, and they're the second largest bank in Germany already as a challenger bank. So these fintechs are not just simple, small technology companies. Some of the largest banks in the world today are fintechs. And all of the fastest growing financial institutions in the world today are either fintechs or technology companies. 40% of UK residents pay their salaries into a fintech or a wallet, not into a traditional bank account the way we would have thought of, like HSBC or Lloyds or RBS. This is not something that's going to happen in the future. This has happened already. It's happened today. Right? When we talk about banking, it is about the technology for success. Next slide, please. This is an app I built for TD Bank in Canada. I started a challenger bank myself in 2010 in the United States called Moven. Actually, we originally called it Move and Bank. Move and Bank. But the regulator said, you can't use the word bank because you're not a bank. And we're like, but we're delivering banking services. No, you don't have a banking license. Well, can you give us a banking license? No, you've got to have branches. You can't be digital. This is the problem in the US, right? But this concept of a smart bank account is really behind the divergence between fintech banking and traditional banking. A bank account that's smart enough to predict your cash flow, to help you save money. So you ask your bank account in the future, hey Siri, can I afford to go out for dinner tonight? And Siri will say, not after you went to the World Cup. There was too much money you spent on that. You have to stay home, or whatever, right? And now we're seeing contextualization of financial services. So during the pandemic, everyone was buying these Peloton bikes, you know, in the West, these exercise bikes, which were connected to the internet with these apps on it. And you could sign up for one of these bikes and get a loan or a credit application in the sign-up process in real time. We call this buy now, pay later, right? Now, this technology is replacing products like credit cards by allowing us to access credit in real time. Now, buy now, pay later has had a tough time recently because of inflation and the global recession, but it doesn't change the fact that the most efficient form of banking is real time. Next slide, please. So this is what the new technology like smart glasses is going to allow us to do. Walk into a car dealership and see how much we can afford in terms of a car. You might walk into a Tesla dealership, and if you're like me, they'll say, yeah, you should maybe go to Toyota down the road. It's a bit cheaper. You can afford that. Or in the future, when you walk into a home that you're looking at buying, your smart glasses will know you've just walked into a new property that's listed on real estate, and it will know you're looking to buy a home because you've been doing Google searches and looking at real estate websites and so forth. And so as soon as you walk into a listed real estate property, your smart glasses or your smartphone will tell you, here's an offer for home financing. If you're a bank and you're waiting for someone to come and ask you for a mortgage and fill out an application form, you don't have a hope in this space because you need the right data. And so what is the data that you need? You need to know someone's intent to buy a home. Banks don't have that data. Apple has the data, Google has the data, Facebook has the data. So you need to have the data partnerships to be able to build these banking experiences. Now you understand that ecosystem graph I put up earlier, right? You need all of those players. The tech players aren't going to do banking in the traditional sense. They're going to work with banks. You need this sort of collaboration to give the best customer experiences. Next slide, thanks. So this is a video I'm just going to play quickly from Ready Player One, the movie. This is the metaverse, right? And in the metaverse, you know, how are you going to pay and pay for things? This is Parzival, you know, the character in Ready Player One. You should watch the movie if you haven't. And he goes into this store in the metaverse using his VR goggles, and he buys this boot suit. It's a haptic suit that allows him to be in the metaverse and, you know, feel all of the effects of the metaverse. And then they send him the product in the real world, the physical product. Now, you notice he just gestures like this, and he just, you know, clicks on something to buy it, and the money comes out of his cloud-based wallet, his digital wallet, to pay for this boot suit. He doesn't pull out his, you know, his virtual wallet in the metaverse and swipe a virtual card through a virtual point of sale machine. That's not how it works. The mobile wallet is the bridge between the physical and the digital worlds, between the traditional payments architecture and the metaverse architecture, right? This is the technology we're talking about. So mobile wallets are the bridge. If we're going to be using central bank digital currency, it's in a mobile wallet. If we're going to be using crypto or tokens, it's in a mobile wallet. If we're going to be attaching ourselves or deploying a smart contract, it's in a mobile wallet. If we're storing our digital assets, like our DNA records, our medical records, you know, our virtual property that we've bought in the metaverse, you know, like maybe we buy our virtual home or some clothes for our avatar in the metaverse. We're going to store those in a digital wallet. So that as we digitize the planet, we need sort of this infrastructure, digital infrastructure, in the same way that we've thought about storing physical cash or physical assets. You know, you used to be able to go to a bank and get a safety deposit box, and you can put your jewelry or your money in this safety deposit box. Or you could put money in a safe or a vault in a bank. And if you want to secure precious papers, you might lock them up at home. The same is true of digital assets in the digital world. We need to secure them. And you're not going to be using passwords, right? Because passwords are no longer secure. So we're going to have to use biometrics, things like facial recognition, our voice patterns, fingerprints, our behavior. These are the ways we're going to secure our digital assets. Next slide, thanks. And so the big change here, though, is that the economy of 2050 and beyond, going towards the end of the century, a lot of our banking and a lot of our commerce will be run by artificial intelligence. So it's quite possible that by the 2050s, most of our economy is run by artificial intelligence, AI, machine-to-machine transactions. So that's where it gets really interesting, because right now banks act as intermediaries between us and the market. But banks are going to be AIs in the 2050s, potentially, running these markets. And markets will have AIs, and the regulator will have an AI, and the government potentially will be an AI for managing different resources and things like that. This is why technology fairs like this are so important, because as we get into this digital asset management, we have the traditional centralized or traditional finance system, but we have to build an entirely new infrastructure for decentralized or distributed automated financial services for the 21st century. And DeFi is where we'll do our asset management for digital assets and portfolios and so forth. You cannot run the digital world in the traditional finance system. You need something new. This is why crypto has come now, because it parallels the creation of the internet and blockchain and these sort of core technologies we're using. 5G, cloud computing, edge computing. This is all of the infrastructure we need to build this autonomous world of the future. So what does the world look like in 2050 and beyond? Well, maybe governments will have to be automated. Because if you want to lower the cost of government and make government more efficient, you have to apply artificial intelligence. The more artificial intelligence you apply, the more autonomous the government is. And so there's a concept we talk about in the crypto space called a DAO, a decentralized or distributed autonomous organization. These are companies that are built in computer code, not run by people, but run as code. And maybe governments of the future are going to be highly automated like this. So what is the world of the future about? It's all about scale. So for Zenith Bank and for other players in this market right now, adapting means the ability to scale rapidly using digital acquisition and delivery of digital services. This big change is really about creating the digital competency within the organization to be able to execute this. This is a new world. But we have some political and economic challenges ahead of us. There are 4 choices we have in terms of our future direction for humanity as a species. We can choose to reject technology, like the Luddites of history gone by, saying, no, we can't have these machines taking our jobs, let's ban artificial intelligence. We need to keep the humans working. That's the only way they're going to get paid, right? But, you know, I think it's inevitable that AI is going to be involved in society. We could just wait and see what happens, and, you know, when it comes to things like climate change, we could fail to act in a reasonable amount of time, and we could have all of these people impacted by climate change, and this is what I call the fail to stand scenario, where we just waited too long. We've already waited too long, in fact. But then you really have sort of the Chinese and European view of the world versus the American view of the world when it comes to technology. See, the Americans think that technology advancement should be for the wealthiest individuals, that they should get the benefit of these technologies first. Whereas democratic socialist countries like the Nordic regions, China, is using technology to create improvements for the middle class, to improve life for every citizen. This is really ideologically the 2 systems we're going to see competing over the next 20 to 30 years to see which wins out. Is it a form of super capitalism that's going to win? Or this new era of techno-socialism, where we use technology for the benefit of all? So I want to leave you with this one thought for our session today. I'm sure I've given you a lot to think about. But here's the real question. What sort of world do we want in the future? With all of this technology we're creating and all of these new exciting outcomes that are possible with digital and with technology, with all of you here today, with the possibilities for your careers individually and what you could do with the increased wealth that comes from being involved in the technology space, what is the choices that we have to make in the future? Well, we have to basically come to a decision. What are we going to use this technology for? Are we going to use it to make everybody rich, or some people rich? Or are we going to use technology to solve the biggest problems the world has? Homelessness, food scarcity, climate change. Are we going to use technology to create a better society for everybody? Because that is where we are at. That is certainly possible for humanity today. But if we stick to this current system of capitalism without changing the mission of humanity as a species, without changing the intent of this technology, we're going to create more division, more inequality, a bigger gap between the rich and the poor. And that is not an ideal outcome. The optimal outcome for humanity is creating a sustainable, prosperous world where everyone benefits from the advantages that technology, artificial intelligence, and so forth give us. And that's the future I hope that we can create for humanity, and that I hope that you will get behind as well. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. Sorry, before you go, please, once again, a round of applause to Mr. King.
That was a very thought-provoking, informative, and enlightening presentation. Thank you very much.